I bought this house in 1997. I let Rodger and his brother move here in May of '99 to help me with the mortgage payments. His brother's name was Andy. The two of them moved into the lower level of the house. I lived on the top floor. Andy died of rectal cancer in 2000, and Rodger lived alone after that. Without Andy around, I was very concerned about Rodger's well-being. One time I found him passed out in the entryway with an empty bottle of scotch clutched in his left hand, just like this. Then a few days later, he backed his car into the garage door. You can see a trace of the damage here. That same week, the police arrived after Rodger told his sister he was determined to overdose on ibuprofen. This was no healthy way for a man of 68 to be living. Another landlord may have evicted him, but after his missteps, I still had a lot of sympathy for Rodger. It was this capacity for endless compassion that ended up ruining me. The death of his brother had been a terrible blow, but Rodger's entire biography was a catalog of sorrows. He was an orphan, a war veteran. He had spent 2 years in a maximum security prison for a crime he didn't commit. His wife had cuckolded him before dying at the age of 34, and his 9-year-old son was killed in a traffic accident in 1988. His life story was a legitimate tearjerker. Rodger had been on disability since the early 80s. What he really needed was a live-in nurse. He had terrible rheumatoid arthritis. His hands were essentially 2 lobster claws. A war injury had left him confined to a wheelchair, but he really just spent most of his time pulling himself across the floor. His arms were a mess of stringy muscle. They were transparent like jellyfish. He had cataracts in both his eyes, and a brush with oral cancer had left his tongue partially intact. When he got drunk, the alcohol would only amplify his already alarming speech impediment. No, instead of the tough love approach that he probably needed, I tried to kill Rodger with compassion. I began checking in on him more often, occasionally even cooking for him. I was going out of my way to try and get him interested in life again. I would take him to movies, inviting him out with my friends. One time we even went to a comedy club together. I encouraged him to see a therapist, to seek grief counseling. When he refused, I enrolled him and paid for the therapist out of my own pocket. He had nothing in his apartment. He had begun to slowly dismantle his room in the basement after his brother died. Lying in bed at night, I could hear him pummeling the walls with his fists. I never put a stop to it, though. It was a form of release for him, a grieving ritual. He broke through the walls with his bare hands. In the mornings, I would bandage his fists. One time, he broke one of these pipes and flooded the basement with about 2 feet of water. In an effort to improve his living conditions, I bought Rodger this flat-screen TV and these 2 leather chairs, one for him and one for me. We would sit here at night and laugh loudly in unison as Jay Leno did his opening monologue. I was laid off from my job in March, and then, to make matters worse, I was denied unemployment compensation. Although I began spending a good portion of my day on the job search, I tried to devote most of my free time to caring for my tenant. Maybe you see where this is going. I should have seen it myself. Rodger turned out to be one of those people who resent the goodwill of others. Maybe he had low self-esteem. Maybe, deep down, he didn't feel he deserved my help. I can't say. I'm no psychologist. But I did feel him turning against me. It was little things at first. He would try to embarrass me in front of a date, or scrawl hateful language across my door. After a while, we couldn't run into each other without him calling me a sick creep at the top of his lungs. But with his speech impediment, it sounded like sack wap. He hurled his wheelchair through the air at me one morning while I was preparing his vitamin shake. It got worse and worse. I took solace in knowing that I would probably have a new career soon. I would be out of the house more often, on my own, focusing on my own life goals again. In August, I ran into my friend Alyssa at a coffee shop downtown. She's the project manager for a nonprofit that helps third world children in need. Having known about my past involvement with nonprofits, she thought I would be a great candidate for an entry-level position. The job she had in mind was basically data entry. Were I to get it, I would be in charge of maintaining a database of international charity organizations operating in Northern Africa. Since a portion of the position involved telecommuting, she suggested that we conduct the interview at my home. I thought it strange, but she insisted. She wanted to see the potential of my home as a workplace. I reluctantly agreed. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday. I arranged for Rodger to have therapy between 4 and 5 p.m., exactly when Alyssa would be there. But at the last minute, Rodger canceled, claiming his kidney infection was acting up. I cursed myself. For a while that day, everything seemed like it might work out. Rodger was nowhere to be seen when Alyssa arrived. I brought her up these stairs and we did the interview in the dining room. Part of the interview involved a timed typing test. As I took Alyssa downstairs, I let out a deep sigh of relief. She glanced up at me with an almost flirtatious smile. But Alyssa didn't take the door handle here. Instead, she turned and headed towards the basement. I said, "Hey, you can use the door up here to get out." But she seemed confused by my suggestion. And then I realized what was happening even before she began to explain it. She told me how Rodger had called her earlier in the week to request an interview for the same position. She was under the impression that I had been aware of this. Rodger had said it would save her a trip if she could just interview the both of us on the same day. I could see him waiting in the background, wearing a nicely pressed suit and tie. He was standing, which I had never seen him do before, resting his weight on a beautiful cane. Their interview lasted about 25 minutes. Alyssa asked me to walk her to her car afterwards, and I followed her outside. She told me she had decided to hire Rodger. She said he displayed a real commitment to the cause, and he did really well on the typing test. How was that possible, I asked. What about his arthritis? He can't even really use his hands. Hands are like claws, like useless pieces of flesh. How can he type? Commitment, that was fine. It was my job. I was going to take that. I can't even see that. What's it going to be like? Hey, thanks, boss. See you on Monday. With payday, boss. You're going to give that guy the job? I started flailing my arms around like Rodger would, and then I began doing an impression of a speech impediment. I said things like, "Thanks, boss. I can't wait for Monday morning. And is it payday already?" See you on Monday. See you on Monday. When's payday, boss? I made a spectacle of myself. As for Rodger, he took to his new lifestyle immediately. After starting his new job, he seemed to transform himself into a new person. He climbed the ladder quickly, being promoted to a project manager within a matter of months. He moved out of the basement and into a beautiful condominium near his office. He wrote me a very gracious note, and as a token of his appreciation, he made my mortgage payments for 2 months. Sometimes I think back to when I was 17 and lifeguarding at a local public beach. There was a child struggling to stay afloat, and I dove in, and then the kid begins slashing at me with these really sharp fingernails, and my face gets all cut up, and I struggle and strain to stay above water. Eventually, I get the kid out of the lake, and he's okay. Later that week, his parents arranged a small ceremony for me at a local pizza place near my high school. I was presented with a certificate and a small plastic medal.